A long time ago, when Pam and I first got married, we had a, matter of fact, I'll back up just a little bit more. I was invited by the Baptist Student Ministries Director of Clarendon Junior College to come and provide fellowship activities after worship services of a youth-led revival that he himself was preaching in the First Baptist Church of the city where he was living. I spent the weekend with them, and we had a great time, and the kids seemed to like it a lot. And matter of fact, the church was looking for a part-time youth director, a youth pastor, and I found out later on that the young people had actually started a petition to tell our pastor that they wanted me to be there, so their youth director, and that was in November of 19. And so they called me, and I spent my weekends at that town. It was actually about 100 miles away from the city where we were going to college. And I'd go out there every weekend and spend the weekend with them. And that took until May of the next year. And Pam and I were going to get married in July of that year. And the church decided they wanted to put me on full time. And we got a place to live there in that little town, and they made me the full-time youth pastor of that church. Then they decided that, being youth pastor is not worth what we're paying you, so we need to give you another job. So they said, okay, we're going to make you youth pastor and educational director. Oh, okay. And then a month or so after that, the man who led our worship, Stephen, was an English professor at the little junior college there, and they needed somebody to fill in for him when he wasn't able to be there, and so I became the youth pastor, educational director, and fill-in worship leader. Well, it doesn't end there. All right.
Good, I know who I can call on.
Yes, you betcha. Yeah. Things have changed a little bit since then. Then the Baptist Student Ministries Director at the little junior college there, and it was just right across the street from our church, resigned and left, and so they decided they wanted to make me the Baptist Student Ministries Director as well, and said that title was too long, and so they said, okay, we're going to just make you assistant pastor in charge of everything but preaching. How's that? So we spent a couple more years there and had a great time. But on one of those occasions when we had a time to meet with those young people, I had a shoebox. And we had about 60 or 70 kids in our youth group. And I told them, they were sitting all in a circle, and I said, okay, now, I want you to look inside this shoebox. And I don't want you to say what's inside the shoebox, okay? Don't say anything. Don't look strange. Just look at it, close it up, just barely peek into it, and close it up and hand it to the next person, and don't say a word. And so they did that, and went around the circle, and I said, okay, somebody tell me what you saw. And nobody said anything. And you didn't see anything in the box? Let's try this again. And I passed it around with the same rules. Now here's, look in the box, peek in there, see what's in there, and we'll talk about it in a minute. They passed it around. Now, what did you see in the box? And one guy finally got up the nerve to say, I didn't see anything. That's right. But there was something in there. And I'm going to let it out. And you guys be really careful. Because when I let it out, it's going to be the weirdest thing you've ever seen in your entire life. You ready? And I opened the box, and nothing happened. And they said, oh, nothing happened. I said, yes, there did. Something very significant happened here. Did the darkness escape? Huh? Did the darkness escape? No. The light flooded in. And that was the miraculous thing. Darkness cannot overcome light. We're going to read the first 4 verses of John chapter 1 again, and then we're going to continue on down through verse 13. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came into his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become the children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Several years ago now, I went to a meeting in Mexico City, and my roommate for that meeting was an itinerant missionary to Cuba. And so we had a lot of chances to visit about that, and because he was my roommate and had some time to chat. And he was telling me that the evangelical church in Cuba was expanding so rapidly that Fidel Castro, took several actions to try to stem the growth of the evangelical church. And one of the actions that he took was to limit the number of people who could gather at any one house at any one time. Okay? Because these evangelical churches were meeting in homes. And they got so big that they would flood out into the streets or into the yards, and then flood out into the streets, and they'd have speakers set up out around the house, and you could hear it all over the neighborhood. And the people they were blocking the streets and everything. There were so many people at these evangelical gatherings. And so he made a law that no more than 40 people could meet and worship as an evangelical Christian at any time and any place. Okay? So that was the law that he had to enforce, that from now on, no more than 40 can meet together to worship as evangelicals. Well, those 120, 140, 160 people that were meeting regularly at that particular place, you know what they did? They just started another group of 40 over here, and another group of 40 over here, another group of 40 over here, and another group of 40 over here. And it grew exponentially because of the darkness that tried to overcome the light. Did you get that part? Okay. Well, that's not the only thing. What's going on in the world right now, you guys? I don't know if you know this or not, but the Chinese government is trying to win the favor of other nations by building them infrastructure. Did you know that? They're building ports, they're building railroads, and one of the interesting things is, in you talking about darkness, the evangelical Christians in China this year, for the first time, and I know this from personal testimony because some of my grandkids have written me to tell me about it. Some of them that are Christians, not grandkids, they're just my grandkids kind of thing, have told me that they can't have Christmas services. So what's interesting this year, for the first time, they can't have Christmas services. But what's interesting about that is they're still having services. They're just calling them gospel services and praying that those who needed to hear the gospel would be there. Darkness cannot overcome the light. In Kenya, the Chinese people that have gone there to build a railroad for the Kenyan government. The Kenyans, a country about 60% Christian, are winning those Chinese people to the Lord. And the Chinese people themselves are beginning churches and training themselves with the purpose of returning to China someday as missionaries of their own people. Darkness cannot overcome the light. One more illustration, and then I'll point out some things to you from this passage of Scripture. In 1998, there was a total eclipse of the sun that passed right over the city where we were living in South America, in Venezuela. It was amazing at how fascinated we all were to see a total eclipse of the sun. And we had our offices, not my office, but the association had their offices downtown. And so I took advantage of the fact that they were there, and I could get up on the roof of that building, because the parking was on the roof. I could get up on that roof and take pictures of the total eclipse of the sun. And it was pretty fascinating. I had filters for my camera and all that kind of stuff. I had a tripod set up and a lens about this long. And the people, the Venezuelans, thought I was some scientist from North America that was coming down here to study and all that. And it was a lot of fun to talk with them about that. But what was the most amazing thing to me, and here's the total eclipse of the sun. The moon is going to hide the sun from us. But there's two things that happen in a total eclipse of the sun that are pretty fascinating. One is when the moon is exactly centered over the sun, there's this glow around it. It's called a what? A corona. Very interesting, huh? The darkness tried to hide the light of the sun, and all it did was create a crown. Isn't that cool? But that's not all. When the moon began to creep away, or was it just before, or just right after anyway, it passed through the center of the sun. There's this one place where the sun shines through the mountains of the moon, and it's just brilliant there with the rest of the ring there as well. The rest of the ring, and then this brilliant thing, and they call it the diamond ring. Maybe it's a wedding ring, you reckon? Reckon it's a wedding ring where Jesus is marrying his bride. Darkness cannot overcome the light. It tried. In him was life, and life was the light of men. The light shines in darkness, and darkness has not overcome it. And there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He was a witness of that light, and that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness of the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world was made by him, yet the world did not know him. Darkness tried to overcome the light. He came into his own people, and they did not receive him. Darkness tried to overcome the light. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. Darkness continues to try to overcome the light. And folks, if there was ever a time in our own culture where lies and deceit and every other thing that you can think of when it comes to darkness was trying to overcome the light, we are living in that era. And you know what? They lose. Because darkness cannot overcome the light. When you open that shoebox, darkness doesn't get out. Light goes in. We're going to light our candles now during this time of worship. And we are going to be examples of what it means to be light in a lost world. Our world is dark, but we are the light of that world, and we shall not be extinguished. We're going to share that light with each other and with our lost world.